At the family barbecue, my daughter-in-law defamed me as the plague that ruined our lives. She forgot that I was the one paying the mortgage. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. The summer air hung heavy with the scent of grilled burgers and sweet corn as I arranged the paper plates on the patio table. 62 years old, and I still took pride in these family gatherings. Small moments that kept us connected despite our busy lives. My backyard wasn't anything fancy, but I'd spent the morning making sure the flowers were watered, the grass was trimmed, and everything looked just right for my family. "Mom, where should I put these?" Michael, my son, appeared with bags of ice. "In the cooler, sweetheart," I said, smoothing down my blouse. Even now, at 40, Michael still had that boyish smile that reminded me so much of his father. I watched as he walked over to where Susan, his wife of 15 years, stood with her back to me. They had arrived late as usual, but I'd learned not to mention it. Susan's rigid posture and thin smile whenever she greeted me said enough. I'd long accepted that we would never have the mother-daughter relationship I'd once hoped for. As I turned to head back into the kitchen for the salad, I heard Susan's voice drift across the yard. She clearly thought I was out of earshot. "It's always the same thing with her," Susan said, her voice sharp with disdain. "These forced family gatherings, like we're obligated to show up and pretend we're one big happy family." A neighbor's dog barked in the distance. I froze, my hand on the screen door. "Honey, keep your voice down," Michael warned. "Why?" "It's true," Susan continued louder now. "She's been the plague that ruined our lives, always hovering, always having an opinion about everything we do, always holding that money over our heads." My knees felt weak. The money, the mortgage payments I'd been making on their house for the past 8 years, the down payment I'd scraped together by selling my late husband's vintage car collection, the one thing he'd asked me to keep. Turned slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. Michael saw me first, his face draining of color. Susan followed his gaze and had the decency to look startled, but not ashamed. "Emma," she started, then stopped, clearly unable to find a way to smooth over what I'd heard. The patio had fallen silent. My brother-in-law Dave stared at his beer. His wife Janet suddenly became very interested in adjusting her sunglasses. My 2 grandchildren, too young to understand the tension, continued playing with the sprinkler on the lawn. "The plague that ruined your lives," I repeated, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the trembling in my hands. "That's what I am to you?" Michael stepped forward. "Mom, she didn't mean—" "I heard exactly what she meant," I said, cutting him off. I looked directly at Susan, whose chin had lifted in that defiant way of hers. "The plague that ruins your lives has been paying the mortgage on your house for 8 years. But don't worry, I won't be ruining your lives much longer." I set down the salad bowl carefully, turned, and walked through the house. I grabbed my purse from the hallway table and stepped out the front door to my car. I didn't cry until I was safely inside with the doors locked. And then, like a dam breaking, the tears came in great, heaving sobs that I muffled against the steering wheel. For 30 minutes I sat there, waiting for Michael to come after me. To apologize. To say anything. No one came. When I finally drove away, I caught a glimpse of them all still in the backyard, the barbecue continuing as if I'd never been there at all. At home, I moved through the empty rooms like a ghost. I'd lived in this small ranch house since before Michael was born. After my husband Jim died 20 years ago, I'd had plenty of opportunities to downsize, but I'd kept it, telling myself that Michael might need it someday, that my grandchildren deserved a place with a yard to play in when they visited. I sank onto the edge of my bed, staring at the wedding photograph on my nightstand. Jim's confident smile, my hopeful eyes. We had been so young, so certain that love was enough. "What would you do?" I whispered to his image. The silence stretched around me, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. I'd given everything to build this family, my youth, my savings, my dreams of traveling after retirement. All sacrificed because I believed family came first. And now, sitting alone in my bedroom while they continued their barbecue without me, I finally allowed myself to wonder if I had been wrong all along. 3 days passed before my phone rang. 3 days of silence broken only by the occasional text from Janet asking if I was okay. I hadn't responded to any of them. When Michael's name finally appeared on my screen, I stared at it for 5 rings before answering. "Mom," he said, his voice tight. "Susan wants to apologize. Not I want to apologize. Not, I'm sorry I didn't defend you. Susan wants to apologize." "Does she?" I said, my voice hollow. "She was just having a bad day. You know how she gets when she's stressed about money." I closed my eyes, remembering the day Jim died. Michael had been 20, halfway through college. I'd been 42, suddenly a widow with a mortgage, half the income, and a son who still needed my support. I'd gone back to work the day after the funeral, taking on extra shifts at the hospital where I worked as a nurse, determined that Michael wouldn't have to drop out of school. "Mom, are you still there?" "I'm here," I said, opening the drawer of my desk where I kept all the important documents. "Michael, do you remember when you and Susan wanted to buy that house? The one you're living in now?" He hesitated. "Of course." "Do you remember what the bank said?" Another pause. "They said we didn't qualify for the loan." "And what did I do?" "Mom, this isn't—" "What did I do, Michael?" He sighed. "You put down $50,000 for the down payment, and you co-signed the loan." "I didn't just co-sign. I'm the primary borrower. The house is in my name because your credit was so bad back then." I pulled out the mortgage statement, though I knew the numbers by heart. "I've been making the payments for 8 years. That's over $150,000. We've been going through a rough patch. Susan's business isn't doing as well as she hoped, and the kids need so much these days." I thought about my grandchildren, Emma and Thomas, 8 and 6. Sweet kids. I hadn't seen them in almost a month before the barbecue, despite living only 20 minutes away. "Remember when you called me at 2 in the morning because Susan's car had broken down and you needed $4,000 for a new transmission, Mom? Or when Thomas needed braces and your insurance wouldn't cover it? Or when Emma wanted to start ballet lessons? Are you keeping score? Is that what this is about?" His voice had that edge now, the one that sounded so much like Susan's. "Influence. No, it's not about keeping score." I closed the drawer. "It's about respect, Michael. It's about appreciation. So we should bow down and thank you every day because you helped us out? Is that what you want? For us to feel indebted to you forever?" His words stung like a physical slap. "That's not what I meant. Susan was right. You hold that money over our heads." I thought of Dorothy, my oldest friend, who had warned me years ago. "You're raising a man who thinks he's entitled to your help," she'd said after I paid off Michael's credit card debt for the 3rd time. I had defended him then, told Dorothy she didn't understand. Now I wondered if I had been the one who didn't understand. "I never asked for gratitude," I said finally. "Just respect." "Well, I'm sorry if you don't feel respected," Michael said, his tone making it clear he wasn't sorry at all. "But Susan's under a lot of stress with her business, and the kids are always needing something. And we're drowning here, Mom." I recognized the familiar turn in the conversation, the subtle shift from accusation to need. This was the pattern we'd established years ago. Michael would make me feel guilty, then present a problem that only I could solve. "How much?" I asked, the question automatic after so many years. "What? How much do you need this time?" There was a pause, then 8,000. "Just to catch up on some bills. We'll pay you back, I promise." The same promise he'd made dozens of times before. I closed my eyes and remembered Jim's voice. "You can't pour from an empty cup, Em," he used to say. I'd been pouring from an empty cup for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to be full. "I need some time," I said finally. "Time? Mom, these bills are due now. I need time to think about everything. About this relationship. About what it's costing me." "Cost? Is that all we are to you? A cost?" His voice rose, indignant. "We're your family, Mom. Your only family." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with accusation and manipulation. Family. The word that had been both my anchor and my chain for so long. "I have to go," I said, suddenly exhausted. "Mom!" I hung up before he could say more, before he could pull me back into the cycle we'd been repeating for years. Family was supposed to lift you up, not drain you dry. Somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten that. The morning after my conversation with Michael, I found myself sitting at my kitchen table surrounded by photo albums. Pictures of Michael as a toddler, grinning with a missing front tooth. His high school graduation. His wedding day with Susan, her smile tight even then. Family. Christmases, birthdays, vacations, moments I had treasured, believing they were the building blocks of a loving family. How had I been so blind? My phone buzzed with a text from Dorothy. "Coffee today?" Dorothy had been my friend for 30 years, since we'd worked the same floor at the hospital. She'd seen me through Jim's death, through Michael's turbulent teenage, years through everything, and she had tried to warn me. An hour later, we sat in her sunroom, steam rising from our coffee cups. "I've been worried about you," she said, studying my face. "Janet told me what happened at the barbecue." I stared out at her garden. "Did you know? All this time, did you know how they felt about me?" Dorothy's silence was answer enough. "Why didn't you tell me?" She sighed. "I tried, Emma. God knows I tried. Remember 3 years ago when you paid for their kitchen renovation?" I remembered. $30,000 that I'd taken from my retirement fund. I told you then that they were taking advantage of you. You said I was being paranoid, that Susan was just misunderstood, I finished. I said Susan was just misunderstood. You wanted so badly to believe they appreciated you. Dorothy reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You didn't want to see the truth. I thought back to the kitchen renovation. Susan had shown me their plans. Granite countertops, custom cabinets, a wine fridge, things I'd never had in my own kitchen. When I'd hesitantly suggested something more modest, she'd looked at me with such disappointment. Michael said you were excited to help, she'd said. But if you can't afford it. Of course, I'd written the check the very next day. When was the last time they invited you over for dinner? Dorothy asked now. When was the last time Michael called just to check on you, not to ask for money? I couldn't remember. The realization settled in my chest like a stone. They visit on holidays, I said weakly. Which holidays? Christmas, when you give them expensive gifts? Thanksgiving, when you cook the entire meal? I looked down at my coffee, no longer able to meet her gaze. Emma, Dorothy said gently, you deserve better than this. After leaving Dorothy's, I drove, past Michael and Susan's house. The sprawling 2-story colonial sat on a corner lot in one of the nicest neighborhoods in town. The lawn was perfectly manicured, the flower beds meticulously maintained by the landscaping service I also paid for. I slowed as I approached, noticing Susan's new SUV in the driveway, another emergency I'd helped with 6 months ago when her old car had suddenly become unsafe for the children. As I watched, Susan emerged from the house dressed in tennis whites, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. She laughed as she got into her car, not a care in the world, not the behavior of someone drowning in bills and stress. Something cold and hard settled in my stomach. I pulled away before she could notice me. That evening, I sat at my computer and opened my banking records. For the first time, I forced myself to see the truth in numbers. Over the past decade, I had given Michael and Susan more than $300,000, not including the mortgage payments. $300,000 of my retirement, my security, my future, gone. And for what? To be called a plague? My phone rang, displaying Michael's number. I let it go to voicemail. A text followed immediately. Mom, did you think about what we talked about? The bills are due Friday. No, how are you? No apology, just another demand. I set the phone down, without responding. Later, as I was preparing for bed, my doorbell rang. Michael stood on my porch, his expression a careful mix of concern and impatience. Mom, are you okay? You didn't answer my calls. I'm fine, I said, not inviting him in. He shifted uncomfortably. Look, about the other day, Susan feels really bad about what happened. Does she? I asked. Or do you just need that money? His face hardened. That's not fair, isn't it? Mom, we're really in a tight spot here. The property taxes are due, and Emma needs a new laptop for school and… Michael, I interrupted. When was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? Not to ask for money, not to have me babysit, just to check on your mother. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. That's not. We've been busy. Too busy to call your mother, but not too busy to ask for $8,000. His face flushed. If you're trying to make me feel guilty… I'm not trying to make you feel anything, I said, suddenly tired. I'm just stating facts. We stood in silence, the weight of unspoken truths between us. So you're not going to help us? He finally asked. I didn't say that. I said I needed time. We don't have time, Mom. The bills are due. Friday. Yes, you mentioned that. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. I don't know what you want from me. I looked at my son, this man I had raised, and felt a profound sadness. That's exactly the problem, Michael. You don't know what I want. You've never asked. I closed the door gently and leaned against it, listening to his footsteps retreat down the path. The next morning, I made a decision. Instead of answering the increasingly desperate texts from Michael, I called my bank and made an appointment with a financial advisor. It was time to understand exactly where I stood. Mrs. Reynolds, the advisor said, reviewing my accounts with a deepening frown, your retirement savings are significantly below what they should be for someone your age. I nodded, swallowing hard. I've had some. Family expenses, she showed me the projections on her computer screen. At my current rate, I would run out of savings within 5 years of retirement. The mortgage payments on Michael's house were draining my accounts each month like a slow bleed. Do you have any other assets? She asked. Just my house, I said. I own it outright. That's something, she said encouragingly. But Mrs. Reynolds, I have to be honest with you. You need to make some significant changes if you want to have any financial security in retirement. I left the bank with a knot in my stomach and a folder full of grim projections. In the parking lot, I sat in my car and called the mortgage company that held the loan on Michael's house. I'd like to understand my options, I told the representative after confirming my identity. If I wanted to remove myself from this mortgage, what would that look like? The other borrowers would need to qualify for the loan on their own, or they'd need to refinance, she explained. And if they don't qualify, then the property would typically go into foreclosure unless the payments continue to be made. I thanked her and hung up, my hands trembling slightly. Michael and Susan would never qualify for the loan on their own. Their credit was still poor, and Susan's business, a small boutique that seemed to constantly need just a little more investment, barely broke even. I drove to the county clerk's office next. I needed to understand exactly what my legal obligations were. What I found confirmed what I already suspected. The house was primarily in my name, with Michael and Susan as secondary owners. I had been the one to sign most of the paperwork, with them merely adding their signatures at the end. On the way home, I drove past their house again. This time, I noticed a lawn sign for a landscaping company I didn't recognize. Had they finally started paying for their own lawn care? Then, I spotted the pool company truck in the driveway. A pool? They were installing a pool when they couldn't even pay their bills? I pulled over a block away, my heart pounding. Through a gap in the hedge, I could see workers in the backyard. Susan stood with a man in a suit, examining what looked like blueprints. A wave of anger washed over me. $8,000 for emergency bills, while they were planning a swimming pool. When I got home, I called my longtime friend Robert, who happened to be a real estate attorney. "Emma, it's been too long," he said warmly when he answered. "How are you?" "I need some legal advice," I said, getting straight to the point, "about a house I own with my son." 20 minutes later, I had a clearer picture of my situation. Because my name was on the deed and mortgage, I had certain rights, but also significant liabilities. If I simply stopped paying the mortgage, it would destroy my own credit. "You essentially have 3 options," Robert explained. "Continue paying and maintain the status quo, force a sale of the property, or have your son and daughter-in-law refinance without you. And if they can't refinance, then you're back to options 1 or 2. I thanked him for his advice and hung up, my mind racing. I needed more information before I could make a decision this big. My phone buzzed with another text from Michael. "Mom, please, we really need your help. Susan is really stressed about these bills." I set the phone down without responding. The Susan I'd seen examining pool plans hadn't looked stressed at all. That evening, I called Janet, my sister-in-law. She had always been closer to Michael than I realized, often hearing things I didn't. "Emma," she said, obviously surprised to hear from me. "Are you okay? After the barbecue, I need to ask you something and I need you to be honest with me," I said. "Has Michael said anything to you about financial problems?" There was a pause. "What kind of financial problems?" "He says they're drowning in bills, that they need $8,000 urgently." Janet's silence spoke volumes. "Janet, please, I need to know the truth." She sighed heavily. "Emma, they just put a down payment on a pool, $15,000. Susan's been showing everyone the designs." The confirmation hit me like a physical blow. "When?" "Last week. Susan said it was an early anniversary present from you." I closed my eyes, letting the magnitude of the lie sink in. They weren't just taking advantage of me. They were actively lying about me, using my name to fund their luxuries. "Emma, are you still there?" "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Thank you for telling me the truth." After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table and pulled out the folder from the bank. The retirement projections stared back at me, a stark reminder of what my future would look like if I continued down this path. I opened my laptop and began making a comprehensive list of everything I had given Michael and Susan over the years. Every loan that was never repaid, every emergency that required my financial intervention, every extravagance disguised as a necessity. By midnight, I had a spreadsheet that told the story of a decade of systematic financial abuse. I had been played for a fool, but no more. The next morning, I called my bank and scheduled an appointment with their mortgage specialist. Then, I called a real estate agent I trusted. It was time to take back control of my life, my finances, and my future. 1 week after my visit to the bank, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by documents. Mortgage statements, bank records, retirement, projections, the paper trail of my years of sacrifice, and Michael and Susan's years of exploitation. I had spent the past week in meetings with financial advisors, real estate attorneys, and mortgage specialists. I understood my situation clearly now, and I had made my decision. When the doorbell rang that evening, I was ready. I gathered the documents into a neat folder and went to answer it. Michael and Susan stood on my porch, both looking more agitated than concerned. Susan's arms were crossed tightly over her designer blouse, her foot tapping impatiently. Michael held his phone in his hand, as if ready to show me something, probably more bills they couldn't pay. "Mom," Michael started, his voice already edged with frustration. "You haven't been answering our calls or texts for over a week. What's going on?" "Come in," I said calmly, stepping aside to let them enter. They exchanged a glance before walking into my living room. Neither of them sat down. "We're in serious trouble, Mom," Michael said, cutting straight to the point. "The bank is threatening to foreclose." I raised an eyebrow. "Which bank? The mortgage is with Summit Financial, and I've made every payment on time." Michael blinked, caught off guard. "I meant, our credit cards. We're maxed out, and they're threatening to take legal action." "How much do you owe?" I asked. "About $30,000, he admitted, looking down. "And you need me to pay it." Susan stepped forward. "Emma, I know we had a misunderstanding at the barbecue, but this is serious. We could lose everything." "A misunderstanding?" I repeated. "You called me a plague that ruined your lives. Was that a misunderstanding?" Susan had the grace to look uncomfortable, but quickly recovered. "I was stressed. I say things I don't mean when I'm stressed. Like when you told Janet that the new swimming pool was an early anniversary present from me." The color drained from Susan's face. Michael looked between us, confused. "What swimming pool?" he asked. I turned to my son, watching realization dawn on his face. "You didn't know?" I asked. "About the $15,000 down payment last week?" She said her parents helped with that," Michael stammered, turning to Susan. Susan's face hardened. "My parents wouldn't give us a dime. You know that." "So you lied to me?" Michael's voice rose. "We're drowning in debt, and you put down $15,000 on a pool?" "We deserved something nice for once," Susan snapped. "Do you know how hard it is to be the only family in the neighborhood without a pool? Do you know what people think?" I watched them argue as if I weren't even there. This was their dynamic. Susan pushing for more, Michael weakly objecting before giving in, and then both of them coming to me with outstretched hands. "Enough," I said finally. They both turned to me, momentarily united in their surprise at my firm tone. "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the couch. "Both of you." They sat, looking like scolded children. I placed the folder on the coffee table between us and opened it to reveal the documents inside. "For the past 10 years, I have given you over $300,000, I began, my voice steady. "That doesn't include the mortgage payments I've been making on your house, another $150,000. Michael started to speak, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished. I've paid for renovations, cars, vacations, private schools, and countless emergencies. I've drained my retirement savings to fund your lifestyle. And in return, I've been treated like an ATM at best, and a plague at worst." Susan's face flushed with anger. "Is this why you called us here? To throw your generosity in our faces?" "No," I said calmly. "I called you here because this ends now." I slid a document across the table toward them. "This is a statement showing that I've made the final mortgage payment on your house. As of today, I am no longer making payments." Michael's eyes widened. "But we can't afford—" "I'm aware," I interrupted, "which is why I've also filed paperwork to put the house on the market." "You can't do that!" Susan exploded, jumping to her feet. "It's our house!" "Actually, it's primarily my house," I corrected her. "My name is first on both the deed and the mortgage. I've consulted with attorneys, and I have every right to force a sale." Michael's face had gone pale. "Mom, please, where would we live?" "That's for you to figure out," I said. "You're 40 years old, Michael. It's time you stood on your own feet." "You cold-hearted bitch," Susan hissed, her mask of politeness completely gone now. "After everything we've done for you?" I laughed, genuinely amused. What exactly have you done for me, Susan? Please, enlighten me. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, unable to name a single thing. We're family, Michael said weakly. You can't just abandon us. I'm not abandoning you, I replied. I'm refusing to enable you anymore. There's a difference. So that's it? Susan's voice rose hysterically. You're throwing us out on the street because of one little comment? No, Susan. I'm taking back control of my life because of years of disrespect and financial abuse. The comment at the barbecue was just the final straw. Michael stood up, desperation in his eyes. Mom, please. We can work something out. I promise we'll change. I looked at my son, this man I had raised and loved and sacrificed everything for, and felt a strange mixture of sadness and liberation. I hope you do change, Michael. But not for me, for yourself. Susan grabbed her purse, her face contorted with fury. You'll regret this. When you're old and alone, with no one to take care of you, you'll regret this. I met her gaze steadily. I'd rather be alone than be used. Michael looked torn, caught between his wife's rage and his own shock. The real estate agent will contact you tomorrow to arrange viewings, I said. When the house sells, you'll receive 20% of the proceeds, enough for a security deposit and first month's rent on an apartment. The rest will go back into my retirement fund. This isn't over, Susan spat as she stormed toward the door. Michael, come on! Michael hesitated, looking at me with pleading eyes. Mom? It's time to grow up, Michael, I said gently. For both our sakes. As the door slammed behind them, I sat down in my armchair, suddenly exhausted. The house felt emptier than before, but also lighter. As if a weight I had been carrying for years had finally been lifted from my shoulders. I had done what I needed to do. Now I just had to be strong enough to see it through. 1 year later, I stood on the small deck of my coastal cottage, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and pink. The salt-laden breeze tugged at my hair, now worn shorter and free of the hair dye I'd used for years. At 63, I had finally stopped trying to look younger for everyone else and started living for myself. The 6 months following my confrontation with Michael and Susan had been the hardest of my life, harder even than when Jim died. At least then I'd had purpose, raising Michael, preserving our family. This time, I had to learn who Emma Reynolds was when she wasn't someone's wife, or someone's mother, or someone's financial safety net. The sale of Michael's house had gone through more quickly than expected. The real estate market had been hot, and the house, with its premium location and the half-finished pool that had to be filled in, had sold for well above asking price. As promised, I gave Michael and Susan 20% and put the rest into my retirement fund. They had been furious, of course. Susan had launched a campaign of whispered rumors among our mutual acquaintances, painting me as a heartless mother who had abandoned her family in their time of need. Some people believed her. I lost friendships I had thought were solid. For a while, I questioned myself daily, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. But slowly, I had rebuilt. First, I'd sold my old house. Too big, too full of fading memories, and found this peaceful cottage 30 miles from my old life. Close enough to maintain the friendships that had weathered the storm, far enough to start fresh. Behind me, the screen door creaked open. "Tea's ready," Dorothy called, carrying 2 steaming mugs out to the deck. She had been my rock through everything, never judging, always supporting. "It's beautiful tonight," she said, settling into the chair beside me. "It always is," I replied, accepting the mug gratefully. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky deepen from pink to purple. This was one of the gifts of my new life, the ability to simply be without constantly attending to someone else's needs. "Have you heard from Michael?" Dorothy asked eventually. I nodded. "He called yesterday." After 3 months of angry silence following the sale, Michael had reached out. The conversation had been awkward, strained with unspoken emotions, but it had been a start. Over the past 9 months, we had slowly begun rebuilding our relationship. Not as it had been, with me as the ever-giving mother and him as the ever-taking son, but as something new, something healthier. He and Susan separated, I said, the words still strange on my tongue. Dorothy raised her eyebrows. Really? When? About a month ago. He's been staying with a friend from work. After losing the house, they had moved into an apartment they could barely afford. Without my financial support, Susan's spending habits had quickly become unsustainable. The arguments had started almost immediately, Michael told me, with Susan blaming him for not standing up to me, and him finally seeing her for who she truly was. He asked if he could come visit this weekend, I added. And what did you say? I said yes. I smiled at Dorothy's concerned look. Don't worry. We're not going back to the way things were. He knows that. In our recent conversations, Michael had begun to show glimmers of the son I had raised. Before Susan, before the entitlement, before the years of taking. He was working 2 jobs now, living in a modest apartment, learning the value of earning his own way. He had apologized, not once but repeatedly, for everything he had put me through. I wasn't naive enough to think one apology could erase years of behavior, but I was hopeful enough to believe people could change if they truly wanted to. I'm proud of you, Emma, Dorothy said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. I know how hard this year has been. I squeezed back, grateful for her friendship. The hardest things are often the most necessary. After Dorothy left, I sat alone on the deck, watching. The stars emerge one by one. I thought about the Emma I had been a year ago, depleted, taken for granted, afraid to rock the boat, and marveled at how far I had come. I had started painting again, something I hadn't done since Michael was born. My cottage walls were covered with seascapes and landscapes, each one a testament to my rediscovered creativity. I had joined a local book club, made new friends who knew me simply as Emma, not as someone's mother or benefactor. Most importantly, I had reclaimed my financial security. With the proceeds from both house sales and careful budgeting, my retirement was now solid. I would never be wealthy, but I would be comfortable, able to live these golden years on my own terms. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Looking forward to this weekend. I have some good news to share. I smiled, typing back. Can't wait to hear it. Drive safely. Our relationship was different now, more balanced, more honest. He came to me for advice sometimes, but never for money. We were learning to be mother and son without the toxic dynamics that had poisoned our bond for so long. Susan still refused to speak to me, but that was her choice. I had made peace with the fact that some relationships couldn't be salvaged, and shouldn't be. Inside my cottage, I moved through the small, cozy rooms I had decorated exactly as I wanted, without considering anyone else's preferences. On my bedside table sat a framed photo of Jim, alongside a newer one of Michael and me taken at Christmas, our first holiday together after the fallout. His smile had been tentative, mine cautious, but we had been trying, and that was what mattered, as I got ready for bed. I caught my reflection in the mirror and paused. The woman looking back at me was older, yes, with lines that told the story of both joy and heartbreak. But there was something else there, too. A quiet strength, a hard-won wisdom. You did it, I whispered to my reflection. You built a house, for yourself, not for anyone else. And this house, this life, was finally, truly mine.